What is the Welsh way of life?
No idea.
It's a dose of religion, because that is considered respectable and you're in the right state of society.
To me, it means not speaking English to begin with, because I find it really difficult to speak English. I live in a village in Gwaunty where people can lift the latch and go in without knocking at the door. That's the Welsh way of living to me.
And then there's some surreptitious drinking, and if you have something to spare, you'll probably go out to dinner, and in addition, you'll have that little bit of drinking again.
Do they live any differently from other people?
Oh, I don't know, some do. Up in that Toronto way, yes.
What do they do there?
Well, I don't know, a bit rough and ready than the Cardiffans.
If you're in the north, you will go to Liverpool to see the soccer matches, and in the south you'll go again to see the rugby matches, but you'll have a little booze up again at the end of each of those.
What is your opinion of it?
What's your opinion, please, Morgan?
I don't think there's such a thing as a Welsh way of life, a Welsh way of life. I think there are Welsh ways of life that differ from area to area, from time to time. And I think it's the from time to time that counts, because I think in many ways that the Welsh way of life is not something to be found amongst all Welshmen en bloc. It's really an image.
But how much of the image is reality? Haven't we got just the same needs, the same desires, and ultimately the same attitudes as the English or the Americans? Or maybe this is the way we all live when we can afford it, except that some of us feel we ought not to. We were made for better things, like singing hymns and composing poetry and being sad. How did it come about that while the world lives one way, we think we ought to live another? Has cabaret in Cardiff nothing to do with Welsh fervour and with Welsh reflexes? But was there ever really a Welsh way of life?
If I were asked now, what is the Welsh way of life, I would have to give a fairly conventional answer, that it's largely a Welsh nonconformist way of life, spread through Wales between 1890 and 1910, that sort of thing. And then that is the period, 1890 to 1910, when Wales makes a terrific impact upon English politics. And so what is fashionable in Wales, or what is very noticeable in Wales between 1890 and 1910, makes a terrific impact upon English journalism, a time when English journalism is becoming interested in Wales.
Up and down Wales, nonconformist vestries taught thousands to read and write in Welsh, and the liberal leaders of the last century built a national consciousness on this nonconformist base. O.M. Edwards saw a reflection of the new Wales in his own village of Llanuwchllyn. While Lloyd George and other radical leaders were concentrating on political and social inequalities, he tried to build his new Wales in the schools and in the minds of men. O.M. Edwards was a man of vision. O.M. Edwards published and put into print anything that would help intensify an awareness of things Welsh: literary classics, travel books, children's comics. And as Chief Inspector of Schools, he fought to restore to the Welsh language the dignity it had lost under the Welsh knot, when speaking it in school meant disgrace. And the Wales that O.M. Edwards visualized still persists in Llanuwchllyn and in other small towns and villages like it. For to speak Welsh as a first language is as natural to a child as having regard and respect for the traditions of poetry and song. But the Welsh language has survived because the attitudes of these communities have remained those of a rural society.
Not that I was particularly conscious of being Welsh. The Welshness of this town is so strong that it can, up to now, afford to take it for granted.
Ben Thomas, poet and lecturer and a native of Blaenau Ffestiniog.
Welsh is naturally the language that is spoken here, in spite of the influences of a more or less English educational system, the cinema, the English press, and even television. As a boy, I certainly wasn't aware that I was living in an industrial town to any great extent. There's no smoke and grime here, and 5 minutes walk even from the high street will bring you into a green countryside or into the mountains. The great slag heaps are somehow part of the natural landscape. But people here are aware of the quarries, even now when they are in decline. There is an ambivalence in our attitude to them. On the one hand, we heard stories of the exorbitant profits of the quarry owners at one time, of young men dying of silicosis without any compensation being awarded to their families, of broken flesh and bone.
Wel, ffain as y bortas Wilson yda ni, yda ni gyd. Fe socialist yda ni, de. Yeah.
It's no wonder that Blaenefestiniog became a stronghold of a Welsh socialism. On the other hand, we heard of the comradeship of the quarrymen, of the civilized activities and the fun of the caban. Our respect for education, as well as for our Welsh heritage, probably derived to some extent from the caban. But education was also commended to us as a means of escape from having to go to work in the quarries. During the last 30 years, many young people have gone from here to universities and colleges, never to return.
For nearly a century now, students have been able to study at the University of Wales. Aberystwyth University College was a hotel before 1872. This was the heroic age of Welsh education. While some of the best young scholars still went off to Oxford, the University of Wales produced its own generation of students. Parents made their sacrifice willingly, but this led to a brain drain. Alwyn D. Rees.
This side of it could be said to be destructive or disruptive, in that it was essentially a radical revolutionary movement which undermined the basis of rural society. The conversation in the blacksmith shop, for example, turned to everything except ironworking. And whereas out of this background you had a generation of preachers to begin with, it gradually widened into an interest in white-collar jobs and particularly the learned professions generally. And that in its turn led to the production of far more academics and scholars than the rural society required, and therefore to their migration from the rural areas to the industrial areas. That is, rural depopulation in Wales, in a sense, is a product of the ethos of nonconformity itself.
In other words, the community helped kill itself. But in areas like the Rhondda, places that were once rural but which boomed with the coal industry, the flow was the other way. People came in from the Welsh countryside itself, from Somerset, even from Spain. A changing industrial backcloth and changing values. Alan Oldfield Davies remembers the pre-1914 period.
There was a split, I suppose, between those two generations. And as the chapels became weaker and people lost their language, they lost something else. They lost, in a way, a kind of folk memory, because the Welsh language has, in my view, a conserving influence. It helps people to remember something in their past history, which without it they would forget. Now, that, I've no doubt, has its political implications as well. And that is why, on the whole, socialism in the Rhondda Valley was expressed in English. A closed society to a much greater extent than at present, a very confident society, particularly confident in the coal industry that was flourishing, a society that looked back on its Welsh background to a large extent, although people had come from all over the place, all over this country, but they were mainly Welsh, and they were the first, second and third generation. At first, the society in the Rhondda, particularly in Tonpentre, was a community which was surrounding the chapel and the workman's hall. And the two were side by side, just a narrow gully dividing the workman's hall from the chapel. And they both institutions stood roughly for the same kind of cultural life. But then in the early years, I've forgotten the exact date, pictures moving pictures, living pictures came to the Workmen's Hall. And that was the beginning of a cultural split between the Workmen's Hall and the chapel, because the older people in the chapel would have nothing to do with the living pictures. They condemned them. And the Workmen's Hall became also, in its own way, the seedbed of the new socialistic agitation that was fermenting at the time.
D.J. Davis was also brought up in the Rhondda. Weighing up the new socialism and chapel, he opted for socialism and went to what they called the College of the Left.
I think one of the influences that made me question the truth of Christianity and made me less inclined to go to chapel was the fact that the presence in the chapel of so many people who were connected with the pits. The manager was there, the gaffers were there, even the coal owner was there, because they were small coal owners then. And I can remember being struck with a contrast that as between my everyday experience when I saw the man who brought the measuring book round on the weekday under his arm to measure how much work we had done, and he wasn't very generous, was the same person who used to carry the Testament under his arm on Sunday and be prominent in chapel on that day.
Sites that may be valuable, but certainly no longer for religion. This is the carcass of the Welsh way of life as seen by the old liberals. But even the socialist symbol that superseded it, the Workmen's Institute, has undergone its own revolution. This is all that remains of the Hall of Learning, the institute built to educate the masses. Things are much the same at most of the 157 Workmen's Institutes established in South Wales, and even the old-timers have found new interests.
Oh, look at that! I was thinking of last night, man. What's the matter with you? Let's be bloody fair, don't we?
At Hopkinstown, the Institute is still the focal point of social life, but has remained so only by catering for the needs of its 400 members. The ideals of Aneurin Bevan and his political generation have, on the face of it at least, given in to the times.
On its own, number 9. 8 and 4, 84. All the 8s, 88.
It's the income from these sessions that has saved the halls from closing down altogether. This is the new Welsh way of life. At least it is in the mining valleys. In Hopkinstown, every house is a full house. But is there anything Welsh about bingo?
You see, the funny thing is that in the 18th century, or long ago, all the Welsh spoke Welsh, they all played the harp, they all wore Welsh tweeds and so on, but it didn't help them to create a Welsh country. They weren't necessarily more patriotic than we are now, and we have none of these things, or very little of them, or only the debris of this basis for true separateness. The odd thing is that the reality behind separateness has only a very indirect connection with national awareness. The odd thing is that in the 20th century, all people have become very similar. We all drink Coca-Cola, as it were. All people have become very similar, and yet that hasn't prevented us from becoming more spikily patriotic and more thin-skinnedly nationalistic in the 20th century all over the world.
The leader of the Sunday opening campaign at the recent referendum was David Baird Murray. To him, the anomalies spell out hypocrisy.
What I'd like to say is that there's already Sunday opening throughout Wales. Every county in Wales is open on a Sunday. The clubs are open throughout Wales. The hotels are open for any residents who happen to be staying there. The off licenses are open throughout the week so that people can take home a drink to have on Sunday in their own homes. The whole of Wales is open on a Sunday. The only person who can't have a drink on a Sunday is the unfortunate visitor, and the only place that is shut on a Sunday is the pub.
This was David Baird Murray's prophecy before the polls.
In this campaign this time, we will find that people who are indigenous Welsh people, speaking Welsh, will vote for Sunday opening just as much as the English-speaking Welshman will vote for Sunday opening. I don't think it's Welshness. I think what it is temperance. Now, this has been part of the Welsh way of life over the last 80 years, but it is weakening. People are realising that demon drink is not so dreadful.
At the polls, it was the Sunday openers who won the battle. It seems only a matter of time before they win the war as well. Today, two ways of life follow, as it were, an alcoholic boundary. But it's Cardiff that chose the trend for tomorrow. This is one of 12 nightclubs in the capital. What price the Welsh way of life now?
It's not at all relevant to the majority of people in Wales today if they don't want it. If they don't want this awareness, it's up to them. It's a reservoir in the past that you can simply call upon. I always think of it as a reservoir, and you can choose to turn on the taps if you want. And it seems to me that most people in Wales are looking for some sort of identity. This is clear to me. And some of them have found it in Britannicism and so on. And some of them turn to Welshness when they're seeking identity. I don't think that necessarily means that they're going to become nonconformists or speak Welsh. It's got nothing to do with that. But they're merely looking for an identity, and they can turn on the taps of this reservoir when they want.